Hi and welcome to Happiness by Design. I'm Darren Morton, and in this episode we're going to be looking at what goes on inside your head as we study the anatomy of happiness. To help us out, I've got my resident model, Fred the Half-Head. Fred has generously agreed to allow me to have a look inside his brain, and I can assure you yours is much the same as this. And what I'd like to do is just open up Fred's head. Please ignore the fact that Fred looks a little ladylike, but if we open up inside Fred's head, what we'll find is there is a part just here. You can see indicated by the white structure, and perhaps even easier to visualise on this other hemisphere of the brain. Located right here, and it is a fascinating part of the brain that is attracting a wealth of research attention at the present. The reason for that is that we have identified, or neurophysiologists, that is the individuals who study how the brain is wired up and how it works, have been able to identify that this part of your brain is responsible for how you feel, good, bad, or otherwise. So in other words, this is the abode of happiness. Now, it has several structures contained in there, and they all have lengthy names. There's the amygdala and there's the hippocampus, and you may have heard of some of those names, but collectively we refer to this as the limbic system, or as I like to abbreviate and keep things simple, I call it the limbo. And you need to know about your limbo, because what we've discovered is that this part of your brain is not only responsible for how you feel, but also has other very important functions as well. And in this episode, we're going to flesh out and see exactly what those functions are. Now, what I need to point out is that because this part of your brain is primarily responsible for emotions, in fact nowadays in recent biomedical textbooks they refer to this as the emotional brain, and because emotions are its primary function, what we find is that these other functions that it has, it always relates back to its primary function of feeling. So, what are the sub-functions, if you like, of the limbo? Well, the first one is memory. Now I want you to think for a moment, have you ever had the experience, like I, where you've met someone for the first time, they reach out, you shake their hand, they say, "Hi, nice to meet you, I am so-and-so," and you go, "Nice to meet you," and then as you step back, you think, "Oh, where has it gone? It's somewhere in there. They've only just said it, and then all of a sudden that name has escaped you." Why does that happen? And it's awkward, isn't it? I remember I've had times where you're standing there and you think, "Oh, please, where it's got to be there," and you're sort of scanning your brain. Surely that name's got to be in there, but it's as if it's just gone in one ear and out the other, like we say, and you have this awkward moment of anticipating someone else is going to come along that you're going to have to introduce them to, and it's going to be hard. Why is it that we forget so quickly a name like that? Particularly if we contrast it with, I can tell you that I actually don't remember very much from grade 3, but what I do remember is the name of a particular young girl in my class. And why do I remember her name? Well, because whenever I sat next to her in story time, she made my emotions rise. I remember my heart would do the flutter thing and my palms would get all sweaty. You see, the bottom line is this: when you feel strongly, you remember. And if there's no emotions, if there's no feelings, you tend to forget. And so this is the case. We know that, for example, if that person that I've met for the first time and forgotten their name, if I was to come to them again and say, "Sorry, I forgot, what was your name again?" and they were to re-inform me, and then I did that repetitively, what's the message I begin to communicate? Well, it says to them that, you know what, I think that when I met that individual, sparks didn't really fly for them. They really didn't feel that much. And that's the truth of it. And so this is the reason why Dale Carnegie, in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, says that the sweetest sound to anyone is the sound of their own name. Because it communicates a message that we do care. That when we met, there was feelings attached to it. There was feelings, emotions associated with it. And so, the reason why is there that link between how you feel and your memories, is quite simply because your limbo is responsible for both. And one of the reasons why this part of our brain is attracting a wealth of research attention, as I indicated, was that things like post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, are another example of where the limbo is playing a big part on who we are and what we become. I can tell you that from think I was 7 at the time, Christmas Day. I can remember I got this brand new bike for Christmas, and I was just so eager to get on and ride that machine. And when the rain set in, it looked like I wasn't going to be able to christen my new machine that particular day. And I remember my mum then said to me, hey, why don't you just sort of, ride up and down the hallway, do some laps there. And I thought, well, that's what I'm going to have to settle for. And so I remember taking poise, and I probably should explain that, on Christmas Day you tend to want to use all the gifts that you had. Well, I remember having this bow and arrow set over my back, and I remember I had these Spider-Man underwear on. Sorry for the visuals there, but that means that I had on my bare legs, and so I was sitting on this bike, poised, ready for takeoff, when all of a sudden the biggest, blackest, hairiest monstrosity of a spider falls from the ceiling and land cleans onto my bare leg. And I remember my 7-year-old eyes looking down at this thing and just absolutely freaking out. And I did this crazy dance, and I remember this spider sort of clung on for the count of 10 until eventually I was able to throw it off, and then it ran back over to my bare feet, and the whole little crazy dance started again. But what happened is, from that one event, that one moment, the emotional intensity associated with that created within me a memory that I locked onto for a lifetime. And even these days I had to do some work to try and overcome my fear of these particular kind of spider. And I'm not particularly fond of them even today. But the point is this: when we feel strongly, we tend to remember. And I ask you, what things do you remember clearly? If you go back to your school days, what do you remember? What do you remember about the teachers that you may have had? I would suggest that probably the teachers that stand out in your memories are the ones that made you feel strongly. Either they made you feel very good about yourself, or they made you feel very bad about yourself, perhaps created angst within you. I remember two particular teachers that stand out in my memories is one who had this policy of strapping half the class before he commenced with his lesson. And so there's no doubt as to why he features prominently in my memories. Whereas another one was very instrumental in nurturing me towards going after some of the dreams that I've had, and she had a big influence on me, and so she stands out in my memories because of that. The limbo, responsible for memories and emotions, and hence the two are intimately linked. Don't go away, because when we get back we're going to look at the second sub-function of the limbo. Hi and welcome back. Before the break, we looked inside Fred the half-head's head, and we were examining his brain, and we had learnt that your brain is much like this. What we discovered is that part of the brain, this part located around about here, referred to as the limbic system or limbo, is your emotional hub. It's the part of your brain that's responsible for how you feel. It's the abode of happiness, if you like. And what we discovered is that it's also the part of the brain, one of its sub-functions, if you like, is responsible for memory. And hence that interconnection between feeling and what we remember and what we forget. What I'm about to show you is what is the second sub-function, if you like, of the limbo. And in fact, this particular sub-function was discovered by neurophysiologists in some studies they were doing on cats. Now, I don't know why they pick on cats and rats, but scientists often do this. And what they'd done is they'd actually put fine electrode wires into the limbo of these particular cats. And then what they found is that if they were later to stimulate the limbo, just by sending a very fine little electrical current, much like what goes on inside our brains anyway, if they were to stimulate that part of the cat's limbo, the cat would instantly start to purr and do the old with the claws thing and dribble, of course, as cats always do. And what they were able to demonstrate, as they anticipated, is that yes, this is the part of the brain responsible for emotions. But what they didn't expect was the other behaviours that the cat began to exhibit. For example, the cats would become ridiculously relaxed. to the point where they wouldn't move. They just had no motivation. They didn't even have the energy, or it seems the motivation, to eat. Now, can you believe that? They weren't even motivated enough to consume food. That's hard for us, many of us, to get our heads around. Also, what has these two other subfunctions. This part of your brain, one of those subfunctions, is memory, is also responsible for your motivation when the emotional intensity is high. We forget them now, when there's no feeling attached have been telling us that for many years. And the second function no surprise is motivation to learn this piece of information. We are apathetic. Psychologists have always said that the things that people do, the emotional intensity is very low. And we're highly motivated. We're compelled when the emotional intensity is very high. And pain. We do things to stay away from those particular event or a particular situation. I had an experience in the local supermarket. There is one last the things you can learn in the local neurophysiologists have discovered. Just the other day, I was watching a lady. She was pushing her pram along, or the basket, I should say, and she had a young child. And I didn't quite catch his name. I think it was Jimmy or Timmy. And she'd asked him to do a particular thing, and it was to pick up an item from one of the bottom shelves and put it into the basket. And Jimmy looked up at her, and I could tell that he was clearly unmotivated to do this particular task. And the reason I could tell is because he looked up at his mum and he went, "No!" like this, as only young children can. And so he then elaborated, interesting enough, on why it was that he was unmotivated to do this particular chore as he saw it. And in his words, he said, "No!" He says, "I don't feel like it." Now, essentially what he was saying, this young child, is, let me tell you, Mum, you see, my limbo here, my emotional brain is just not motivated towards doing that particular thing. And so hence, I'm sorry, but it's just not happening. However, the story continues. Mums are always one step ahead of the rest, aren't they? And his mum looked down at him without batting an eyelid. And she looked at him, and I remember her saying, now, Jimmy, well, let me help you feel like it. And she produced the hand. And I've just watched little Jimmy's eyes just light up like saucers, and all of a sudden he started pumping these legs and he darted off down the aisle like he'd just stolen something. You know, what that little story illustrates, though, is the truth of how we are motivated by pleasure and pain. Often in life, it's pain that drives us more strongly. And why does it work that way? Why is our feelings and motivation so intricately intertwined? It's because it's the same part of your brain that is responsible for both. And you know what? If you think about it, the things that we feel the most strongly about, the stronger the emotions, the more motivated we are to go after a particular thing. And that is why, you know, the strongest emotions encountered by humans, that is fear and love. Love being the stronger of the two. It is those feelings, those emotions, that drives us to do things that normally we wouldn't. In fact, sometimes we do quite obscure things. In fact, sometimes very smart people can do some very dumb things when the emotion is gripping and strong enough. We had an encounter one time when we had some dinner guests to our house, and we're all sitting around the table, everyone was having a lovely time, when all of a sudden one of the guests just stood on the chair wielding a knife and started screaming, "Get it out of here!" And it was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then we looked, and our pet cat had just wandered into the lounge room. And this particular guest, who was mildly embarrassed about the encounter after it, later recalled that she had an intense fear of cats. Now, I imagine in her right mind she doesn't sort of get up in the middle of dinner and scream wildly wielding a knife, but a strong, powerful emotion will do that to us. In the same way, you think about love. What perhaps have you done for love? Or in your younger years, perhaps in infatuation it may have been. But that motivates us, it compels us to do things that often we wouldn't do. Smart people do some dumb things when our emotions take over, when our feelings take over. So let's just recap on what we've discovered so far. The part of your brain, the limbo, your emotional centre, also has these two other subfunctions. One of those subfunctions is memory, and that is why we remember things when the emotional intensity is high. We forget them when there's no feeling attached to a particular thing. And the second function is motivation. You know, we are apathetic when there's no feelings attached to it, when the emotional intensity is very low. And we're highly motivated, we're compelled when the emotional intensity is very high. attached to a particular event or a particular situation. Yet, there is one last function that neurophysiologists have discovered about this emotional brain, the limbo. And we're going to learn what that is right after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Happiness by Design. My favourite sport is hang gliding. Now, for those of you not familiar with hang gliding, you essentially take an oversized kite that weighs about a third of your body weight. You hook yourself in, pick this thing up, walk over to the edge of some ridiculously high cliff, and then jump. Well, it sounds fun, but things go on inside my body when I start to entertain the idea of launching. For example, in here, these butterflies come alive, start flying well before I do. Not only that, I find that my heart starts to do some crazy things in my chest. My palms get all sweaty as you're picking the glider up there, slipping on those upright tubes. And you know what? I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to have this nervousness and this apprehension, because often when you're in that state, you tend to be more reserved, and often that's when accidents happen. And so I need to do things to try and counter that. Now, why is it that those things, those symptoms, start to occur in my body? You know, I can't think about it and all of a sudden make my heart rate go up. Or I can't think about it and make the butterflies in my tummy come alive. But a feeling will do it. And why is that the case? Quite simply, because your limbo, your emotional brain, is responsible for many, what we refer to as autonomic or automatic bodily processes. And they include things like heart rate. They include things like gut function. They include temperature control and a range of other things, including, get this, your immune function as well, elements of that. What does that mean? Well, it means that your emotional state has a bearing on these real life physical outcomes, these physiological symptoms. Right? And so for many years we've speculated on, is there a relationship between the mind and the body? Well, what we've discovered is that indeed there is, and it's the limbo that is the connection between the two. Your emotional state affects your physical reality. And so should it come as any surprise to us that we have an ongoing period of stress in our lives, and it carries on, and we might not even at a conscious level be aware of it, but it's just ticking there in the background, and all of a sudden things start to happen in our gastrointestinal tract. You know, we might be producing just a little bit more acid and our tummy's a bit churned, and so over a period of time, all of a sudden, ta-da, you have yourself a stomach ulcer. Or should it come as any surprise that over an extended period of time when we have adverse emotional states hanging in the background there, it might be unresolved guilt, it might be unresolved anger, it might be just stress, as we all encounter nowadays. But all of a sudden it starts to result in, you know, blood vessels being constricted, high blood pressure, heart complaints. Is it any wonder? I don't think so. I think there's a clear explanation for it. Your limbo is responsible for not just your emotions, but also many of these automatic bodily processes as well. And hence the two are linked. I mentioned before that this includes one of those automatic bodily processes, elements of our immune system. And so is it any surprise then that also our emotional state is going to affect how we heal and how our health is in a very real way? In fact, we could even say that how you feel affects how you heal. And I think that's a really important distinction to make and something to be very aware of. You know, how you feel on a consistent basis is going to affect your ability to heal. I had the experience of attending a consultation with a specialist, with a very good friend of mine who had just been diagnosed with cancer. And I remember sitting in there in this in the consulting room with the specialist when he made that announcement. He says, "Look, the tests have come back, and yes, it's true. You do have cancer, and it's quite an aggressive form." Now it's interesting, we've learnt about the limbo and how emotions create our memories. And when that person walked out and I spoke with them after, they said that the two things they could remember was cancer, aggressive. That was the words that clung in their mind, stuck in their mind. And I remember watching this person as the doctor announced this, it was like someone had just punched them in the stomach, just absolutely deflated. And when we walked out, I said, do you know what you need to do? You need to make sure that you are up emotionally. And now I know that, that we've got the treatments that you're going to be going through, they're going to be taxing on you. You need to make sure that emotionally you are in the best possible state that you can be. And so they set about doing that. And what they recognised in doing that is that how you feel, I should say, affects how you heal. And they actually, they believe now, and they will testify that they responded so well to their treatment and are doing famously well now. And they attribute a large part of that to being able to get themselves in the right emotional state. How you heal is affected by how you feel. So, what can we conclude? What we can say is that your limbo is your emotional brain, but it also has these sub-functions. Sub-functions like memory, sub-functions like motivation, and sub-functions like automatic bodily processes. And all of these sub-functions get linked back to the primary function of feeling, of your emotional state. And when I look at that, what that says to me is that I want this part of my brain to be in the best possible state I can get it. Because if you can emotionally be up more and down less, what it means is that there's going to be positive outcomes from, your memory, which is a key aspect of our cognition, from your motivation level, which determines to a large extent the things we go after in life and the things that we achieve. And even more importantly, your health, because of the way that it influences these automatic bodily processes. You owe it to yourself to go after a positive emotional state. And in this series, Happiness by Design, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. Powerful strategies that you can do to change your emotional state. But to conclude, let me say one last thing. It's my perspective, my observation, that in fact it's this part of our brain that God often chooses to communicate with us through. Now, I actually believe that God can communicate with us in any means He chooses, and He does so on many occasions. But it seems to me, and certainly from my experience and from my experience with talking with other people, that often when they talk about experiencing God, they talk about how they felt Him. Not how they thought Him, but how I felt His presence. We talk about in powerful worship services how they felt the presence of God. They speak in emotive terms. It's a feeling. And why would that be the case? Well, as we'll discover in later episodes, this part of your brain isn't a good thinker. It's not the thinking part of your brain. This higher part of your brain up here, I call this the guardian. That's the part of your brain that's responsible for thinking. This is the thinking brain. Your limbo is the feeling brain. And because that, it doesn't, often I believe our thoughts can get in the way of our communication with God because we overthink things. And in fact, we talk about faith. Faith, an enemy to faith is overthinking it and overplanning and needing to understand it. Whereas the limbo here can be likened more to a 2-year-old. It's willing to accept, it's willing to go with it. And hence, I believe that's the reason why this part of our brain is one that God often chooses to communicate. I hope that you can join us next time for Happiness by Design as we start to flesh out how it is that we can use this part of our brain to put ourselves on a better plane on a more regular basis. Please join me next time. I'm Darren Morton, reminding you to delight in God's design.